Hello and welcome to Two Guys One Game. This time round we are taking a look at some more games based on Disney classics. If you missed part 1, make sure you go back and give that a watch, as your favourites might be featured there. Anyway, how about I shut the hell up and we take a look at some games. The Sega Mega Drive, or Genesis if that's how you choose to live your life, got two games based on Beauty and the Beast. This one here is called Roar of the Beast. It probably won't surprise you that this is an action platformer that loosely follows the plot of the film, where you play as Beast and you go through various levels retreading scenes of the film. At first glance, the game looks pretty good, with some solid graphics and backgrounds. The music here is also quite good, with decent renditions of the themes from the film. But really, that's about the only positive thing I can say about this game. The rest of it is just a mess, which is such a shame. The main issue here is that there's a constant barrage of enemies coming at you from all over the place, and you barely have any time to react. You can take a few hits before you die, but the hit detection and sloppy control make sure that you're going to have a bad time no matter what. I found that for the most part you're better off just ignoring enemies as much as possible. The problem is that they can appear anywhere off the screen, so chances are if you jump over an enemy you'll be hit by a bat or a bird that appears just seconds later. Most enemies only take 1 or 2 hits to kill, so in theory shouldn't be too much of an issue, but the hit detection is terrible, so you never know if you're going to do the damage or take the damage. Basically, it makes the game incredibly difficult and just unfair. If you do manage to get past the first few stages, you'll notice that nothing really improves. You do get a few varieties of enemies that are unique to each level, and to be fair, each of the levels does look pretty good, but they just share the same issues. I managed to get to the 3rd or 4th stage, and honestly, I don't know how I had the patience to do that. This is one to stay far away from. The second Beauty and the Beast game is called Belle's Quest, and this time round you play as Belle in what is more of a puzzle platformer. Again, the game looks great with some bright, well animated sprites, and the soundtrack is also pretty good still. Here you walk around solving simple puzzles by interacting with characters and the environment. To its credit, the game actually really captures the feel of the film, and Gaston is constantly hounding you, but you can actually use this to your advantage by getting him to do things for you, because you know he fancies you like the little cock tease you are. Other characters will ask you to do menial things for them, like collecting books or helping their sheep get some water, but again, a lot of this does actually fit the character and themes. I did find myself actually quite enjoying this one, strangely enough. The controls are not great, but they do the job. You can still take damage here from various bits of wildlife, things like that throughout the game, which does get annoying as they are very hard to avoid, and for some reason the game makes you press the A button to duck rather than just pressing down on the D-pad, which meant that I took a lot of unnecessary damage. Oh, and then when I did die, this happened. Suffice it to say, I didn't bother starting again, though to be honest I was quite tempted to, but I just didn't want to start from the start of the game again. This is by no means a great or even particularly good game, but it did pique my interest at the very least. If you really want some Beauty and the Beast on your Mega Drive, this is the one I would choose. We might as well stick with bad games and take a look at Fantasia, also on the Mega Drive. This is one of those games where there is genuinely nothing good to say about it. Actually, I take that back. The graphics aren't bad, but that is all. Here, you're meant to guide Mickey through various dreams that all feature renditions of the songs from the film, but the whole thing is just so awful to play that you really won't be seeing much of anything. The controls here are just awful, and they have a slight delay to everything. You've got 2 magic attacks, but you can only use your magic 3 times before you run out, and there's hundreds of enemies that are almost impossible to dodge. You can collect spell books to refill your magic, but they're so few and far between that it's pointless, and if you die, you don't get your magic back, but of course all the enemies that you've killed do respawn. The hit detection here is also just awful, and the enemies that all walk on platforms below you can even hurt you. You can take 3 hits before you die, but honestly they could give you 20 hits and it would still be hard to get anywhere. To be honest, I couldn't even get past the first level, and I genuinely did try, so really there's not much more I can tell you about this one, other than you can bet your ass I will never be playing it again. Shame on you, Sega and Infogrames. Let's get handheld now with Hunchback of Notre Dame, Topsy Turvy games for the Game Boy. And boy, I tell you, we aren't having a good time today, are we? As you can probably guess, it's a collection of mini-games, none of which having really anything to do with the movie, other than there's usually a picture of one of the characters in the background. There really isn't much to say about this one. The mini-games are Chiseler, which is just Breakout, you bounce a ball to break bricks at the bottom of the screen. There really isn't anything else to it. The levels get slightly tougher as you go on, but no matter how long you play it for, it's always boring. Then there's Jolly Bowling, where you use a goat as a bowling ball. I mean, it's bowling. You choose the position, curve and power, and you hope for the best. The next one is Catch a Fall, which is that Game & Watch game where people fall out of windows and you just have to bounce them back into the window by letting them hit your trampoline a few times. That's literally it. It gets a bit faster with each level, but nothing else. Then there's Upsy Daisy, which is a balloon combat game where you choose from a few characters, none of which I recognise from the film, and you have to pop your opponent's balloons before they pop yours, in a game that has some of the worst, most unresponsive controls that I've ever played. And finally there's the picture puzzle, which is just one of those ones where you slide the segments around until you've made the picture. There's no time limit or anything, so you can just go on forever until you do it or you get bored, which will be quite quickly. There's also Funfair, which is just a password system. I didn't have any passwords to see what they actually did, and to be honest, I didn't care enough to even look one up. Yep, this one is another pile of Quasimodo crap, and should be avoided. The Lion King is probably one of the most famous Disney video games, and this one here is the Super Nintendo version.
It starts.
Now, we all know about that infamous second level and the fact that the game is hard as balls, so I don't really need to say much more about that, but what matters is that the game is actually quite good. The graphics and animation are just amazing, with loads of detail everywhere. The music and sound is also great, with awesome versions of the songs from the movie in each level, and there's quite a few voice samples from the film that all sound really good too. The game controls well, with smooth controls. There's a few different play styles. Mostly it's a side-scroller, but you do get an awesome level where you're running from the stampede. It looks really great and is a good way to break up the game a bit. For the final third of the game, you play as adult Simba, and here you have a few different attacks you can use, which are all pretty cool, but the hit detection is not very good, and you'll often get hit a few times when you really shouldn't have. Simba is actually pretty agile at all ages though, with a good few platforming sections of the game requiring you to cling to walls and do some lion parkour. These can take a while to get used to, as you do have to position yourself in just the right spot in order to grab the ledges, but once you get the feel for it, you'll be fine. Now, while I do think this is quite a good game, in all honesty, I don't think I'd recommend it to people, mainly because of the difficulty. It really does bring the experience down. While it is beatable, it's most often frustrating, and the lack of any password or save system really drags it down. I know it has been released for all modern consoles as a bundle along with Aladdin, but I haven't actually played that. I assume it does include quick saves though, but even with that, this would still be a very tough experience. Overall though, it is a good game, but I wouldn't say it's one you need to go out of your way to play. We'll get a little bit more modern now and head to the PlayStation. Here is Hercules, or as it's actually called, Hercules Action Game, which is a dumb title. Thankfully, the game is anything but Dumbo. Yep, it loosely follows the plot of the movie, and you play as Herc as he sets out to stop Hades from being a bastard and get himself reinstated to god status. For the most part, it's a side-scrolling action game and it looks fantastic. The graphics and animation here are all great, really showing off what the PlayStation could have done if people weren't so obsessed with polygons. Though, having said that, the game does have its fair share of polygons in it, but all the characters here are sprites and, like I said, they all animate brilliantly and really capture the feel of the movie. You'll meet everyone from the film, as well as a few generic monsters and enemies to balance things out, but of course they do still fit in and it works well. The levels are all made up of 3D polygons and the blend of everything just works brilliantly. Controlling Herc is good but not perfect. He's responsive for the most part, but a lot of his attacks feel very sluggish, like he's moving in slow motion, which did mean I took a lot of hits when I really shouldn't have, thanks to the muscled man taking far too long to swing his sword, and considering he can lift boulders the size of a house, swinging a sword really shouldn't be much of an issue for him. It's not game breaking or anything though, and you just have to learn to time everything correctly. The levels themselves have a decent amount of variety. You start with some training levels to get you used to how it all works, and how in some of the side-scrolling levels you'll need to walk in and out of the background in some places. These are fine, but I did feel that the training levels went on a bit too long, and I really wanted to get to the meat of the game. But once I did, I was not disappointed. The levels are all large and packed with secrets and items and things to collect. They're all based on actual events from the movie, which is good, and in some cases the levels change to a third-person view where you're constantly running. These levels are impressive to look at thanks to the incredible animation, though it can be tricky to judge the distance of obstacles. There's also some shooter-style levels where you're riding on the back of Pegasus. I found these pretty tough, and there's a barrage of enemies coming at you from all times, and it's hard to avoid taking damage. Thankfully, you do get a generous health bar that can be upgraded throughout the levels. It's also worth noting that the bosses here are really good fun. You get to fight most of the monsters that Hercules does in the movie, like the Hydra, Medusa and the Titans. These are all really well done and look fantastic too. The fights aren't always easy, but they feel surprisingly epic. Lastly, the music, which was already a classic Disney soundtrack, is fantastic, with plenty of recognisable tunes from the movies. So as you can tell, I actually really enjoyed this one, way more than I thought I was going to. No, it's not perfect, but it is an excellent action game with way more positives than negatives. If you're a fan of the movie, this is a must-have, and it's well worth checking out if you're just a fan of action platform games in general. And finally for today, here is Tarzan, released for the PS1 and N64. This here is the PS1 version, which I actually prefer as you get to watch clips from the movie. It's a 2.5D platform game that, you guessed it, follows the plot of the movie. Well, loosely anyway. The game uses polygons for pretty much everything, but still manages to look quite decent, if a little dated nowadays. But you spend most of your time in lush jungles that are teeming with life. There's wildlife all over the place, and some of it wants you dead, some of it will help you out, and some of it just likes to watch what you're up to. This would actually occasionally cause me issues, as there'd be like a lemur or something like that would just be chilling there watching me, and then I'd see another one later on in the level and it would hurt me, but I'd just assume it wasn't going to, as all the other ones I'd seen would just leave me alone. It was a bit annoying, but only a small setback. Actually controlling Tarzan is good, but a bit stiff. To attack, you can throw an endless amount of fruit from your crotch. This is actually very sluggish and stiff, and sometimes you can find a dagger in the levels which lets you stab enemies, but you do have to be very close to them, and again, it's very sluggish, so if enemies are close to you, chances are you're going to be taking damage. I would have much preferred if you could just jump on enemies to beat them, and it's actually what I instinctively did most of the time while I was playing the game. However, once I'd gotten more used to tossing my fruit salad at enemies, I realised that I was actually having a pretty good time with this one. The levels aren't too varied, but for a game set in a jungle, what do you expect? There also aren't too many of them, and the game can be completed in just over an hour. But the way the game plays in 2.5D is really effective, and how the camera swings around and zooms in and out in some areas is actually quite impressive, especially when you transition from swinging on vines to sliding down trees like in the movie. You do also get to play as a few other characters from the film, mainly Tarzan's gorilla mate Turk and Jane, which is nice. They also throw some bonus levels in, and the classic running away from something levels that are apparently required in every 16 and 32-bit Disney game. But they're all well done and a good way to break up the gameplay. Also, like in The Lion King, after a few levels, you switch to adult Tarzan, and what's nice is that controls do become noticeably smoother and he does run faster and jumps higher. This is a nice touch. I did really like the sound and music here too. The music in a lot of the levels is great, and the game uses a decent amount of voice samples, but they don't tend to get repetitive. They're also used mercifully sparingly for when you're collecting items, etc., so you don't hear them too often. Small control issues aside, this is a very solid platform game, and playing it made me really want to go watch the movie again. It's a good game for both the N64 and PS1. You can't really go wrong with either. So there you go, 6 more games based on Disney classics. There might be a few more out there to cover, so I'll probably squeeze out a part 3 somewhere down the line. But in the meantime, what are your favourite games based on Disney classics? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, we upload new videos when we've made them, and you can also follow me on Instagram where I've got hundreds of retro and modern video game reviews. Just search for The Reviews Brothers. Now all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.